Welcome to this episode of Leadership Bites, and however you've made your way to us today, brilliant to have you here. Now, I have Duke Stump on this episode of the podcast, and to say that I had a huge level of anticipation and got, to be frank, pretty excited was an understatement. I came across Duke when I saw a video of his that went across my feed on LinkedIn. It was about one of his new ventures, which is Bonfire with Soul, so check that out, bonfirewithsoul.com, and the link is in the description. It absolutely took my breath away. Hard to explain how something does that sometimes, but you know, when you've been around maybe as long as I have, you can become a little bit, I don't know what the word might be, ambivalent, I guess, to the hype and the marketing that everybody's throwing at you on a daily basis. But this video just reached into me, and it spoke very clearly of an individual who I wanted to make contact with. When I reached out to Duke, I did so with a real sense of honesty and a real sense of just pureness of my reaction, because I can only imagine how many people are trying to make contact with Duke to do some sort of podcast or whatever that might be with him. So I pretty well thought there's absolutely no way I'm going to get a response. And I got one, and it was pretty swift. And his reply to me saying, "Hey, I'd love to have you on my fledgling podcast," was, "Hey, let's set the neighborhood alight." And I thought, wow, okay, this could be pretty good. So I reached out to Duke, I arranged a time, got all excited, was sat in my Zoom room of readiness. And of course, what I'd done was I'd gone in to check all the audio and had forgot to come out, and was sat there like an absolute Burke waiting for Duke to join. Well, he did join, of course, the meeting link that I'd sent him, just not the one that I was sat in, so I missed him. And I was absolutely beside myself with, oh my God, what have I done? So I reached out to him again, and I sent him a little video just saying, "Oh man, I'm really sorry. I'd literally just over-prepared myself to the point of no return," and then was sat there like a twit. And he graciously replied and said, "Hey, no worries, things happen." So we then had the call, and it absolutely hooked me in. There's something about Duke that is, I think, the indicative experience of honesty and transparency and integrity. I was trying to figure out almost while I was talking to him, but definitely on reflection after the conversation, why he had such an effect on me, but also having read some of the commentary on Bonfire with Soul around people's reaction to him, I can see that there's a common thread, a common theme of people's reaction to Duke. It really became quite apparent to me that this is somebody that faces into the world with a sense of fundamental honesty within themselves. This is somebody who has reflected on who they are and what they are, and doesn't see themselves as the finished article by a long way, is without question a lifetime learner, and is an embodiment of curiosity, I think. He's an embodiment of trying to connect with something that goes beyond commercial imperatives, while recognizing that he often works in a commercial space. So as I was talking to him and realizing that his points of reference were sometimes within my understanding and then sometimes not, just because I hadn't read or I hadn't had a line of sight on that point of reference, that this was somebody that was bringing in conversation about earth and soil, and somebody who was bringing in conversation about yoga, and somebody who was bringing in conversation about product. So he has this truly holistic perspective that I think is, to me anyway, an indicator of the loss of connection that we have in the workplace. And that's not new that people make that statement. But I think what Duke has is a sense of what is missing. I think what Duke has is a sense of what it is that by his own actions he can do that is for himself, also to act as a role model or as a way of maybe showing others that are inclined to pay attention to it where their energy and their focus may go. So it feels to me as if he's asking people to consider joining him on a journey. And I like that. I heartily hope that you enjoy this episode just as half as much as I did, and I absolutely suggest that you go and check out Bonfire with Soul. And if I have anything to do with it, I've got to try and figure out a way of staying connected to Duke in a manner that doesn't make him think he's got a new stalker, which I think he might already sense. So I've got to try and figure out how to do that. Enjoy the episode, ladies and gentlemen. I can absolutely say the one and only, but I'm going to say actually, here's the original Duke Stump. Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. Duke, fantastic to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. I'm incredibly excited, and you've gone for the European chic noir Swedish look, and I've gone for the bright lights of trying to be impressive. But lovely to have you on.
It's great to be here. Yeah, I do have Swedish roots. My mom's Swedish, right? I have like that, Stockholm nightclub aesthetic going right now, and it's pre-sunrise here in California, so there's an irony in that.
Well, one of us is pulling off the style thing. I've gone for the uber professional look, but you've got the style thing going on.
You're looking good.
Thank you. Good. Well, compliments to each other. So listen, Duke, I reached out to you on LinkedIn, that phenomenal moment of seeing a clip of yours, which we'll get into in a little bit. You graciously replied. I immediately did some homework on you through, the medium of, typing you into search engines. And so I've got a real strong sense of who you are. But for those that don't know who Duke Stump is, and first of all, we can't negate the fact that you have one of the greatest names that's ever been given, and with a name like Duke Stump, you had to do something good, right?
Well, I will say the name growing up is hard because there's a lot of ribbing going. I mean, especially with the last name Stump. And so if you could just fight through the judgment and the bullying early on, then it's okay on the other end. But that in my youth, it wasn't so great. Trust me.
And what was the thinking process behind that, Mum?
Well, actually, my real first name is Scott.
Right.
And then, but I was in grade school. And there was 5 Scots in the class, and the teacher said, pick a nickname. And I went home that day, and I'm not sure everyone's going to know this program, but it was called Gilligan's Island. It was just a TV series. And there was a surfer guy that washed the shore on this deserted island, and his name was Duke. And I told my mom, my name's Duke. And she's like, okay. My mom and dad were like, sure. I wanted to change my last name too, but they were like, we're not having that. You get one.
That's it. That's the way it is, son.
So anyways, I've had it since the early 70s. So it's been when I hear Scott, I know I'm in trouble. It's either like, no one addresses me as Scott unless it's something formal.
So if I send you an email with Scott in it, you'll pay attention to that.
Yeah. This is something I need to be attentive to.
So listen, I'd just like to get a sense of, for people that don't know you, and when I say who is Duke, what are you known for? What is the stuff that when people do have a line of sight on you, they'll be alert to that history? So a little bit of just that what you're known in the world for. It'd be great to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in one hand, I'm actually known for being unreasonable and irrational. Like my career choices, I think a lot of people are like scratch their heads, like who does that? And professionally, I've worked at really amazing places and emotionally charged, beautiful cultures like Nike. Now, that was actually where I really learned. I learned so much there, actually. And I spent 15 plus years, a third of it in product. I was in sales at one point in Hawaii, which, obviously isn't a bad gig, but I think it was just an amazing time. And it's very few people leave Nike, but after 15 plus years, I felt I was really comfortable and wasn't growing. So I left, but it was clear to me what I was curious about. And I think curiosity is a common thread throughout my life. I wanted to be a part of something super meaningful and pioneering. And so I went to this place called Seventh Generation, which was a leader in corporate responsibilities, 50 people, $50 million, making eco-conscious product. And, there I did learn the role of soul in business. And so what appeared to be incredibly irrational to my friends, there was, in fact, an executive at Nike had said I had just committed career suicide when I said I was leaving. And I was like, I'm really, really confident in this decision. It wasn't just like heat of the moment shift. Like I really thought it through. But in Nike, it's interesting. There was a period there where my first job was called an econ. It's one of the most revered roles, and it's Nike spelled backwards. And the whole concept is you have to know the brand forwards and backwards, and you're put into a marketplace, and you're the eyes and the ears and the voice of the brand. And I was in Southern California, so it was amazing. That's my first job. I'm young. But one of the key things in that was about sensing and signals. Like, what are you sensing and what are the signals that would suggest what's emerging? And so when you do a monthly report, it wasn't like, hey, this is what's selling. It was like, what are you sensing? And I feel like that's a practice that I've carried out throughout my life. And so going from Nike to Seventh Generation was easy because I was sensing, man, there was this thing around corporate responsibility and pioneering a new way of doing business as a force of good that was interesting. And when I then, years later, I went to Lululemon to head up brand. And primarily I'd been in the roles of CMO or Lululemon, it was EVP of brand and community. But for me, that was also an interesting adventure because one, in the fall of 2014, when I got there, it was listed as a brand that by Wall Street that wouldn't exist in 2015. So it wasn't like a bed of roses. It had gone through some kind of mercurial times, but I was fascinated with the role of this thing called mindfulness and what it means in our world. And that was my curiosity at the time. And that was fun. I spent 3.5 years there trying to, in partnership with some amazing people within that company, to create the renaissance of this once revered brand and to bring it back. And that was incredible. And then most recently, up until this past March, I was at Lime, which is micromobility. And it wasn't because I was fascinated with scooters. In fact, when I first saw it in Santa Monica, I was like, this is an absolute shit show. Like, what kind of business is this? Because they were just everywhere. But when I got into the role that transportation plays in human lives, I was fascinated around transit deserts and transit equity. And I was like, wow, like transportation, I've never thought of it as this vehicle for enhancing human life, but it's incredibly powerful when it can be used correctly. So that's a long answer to say I've been in some really fascinating places. I've learned a lot from things and a lot of things that haven't gone well. I give all those tough moments a big hug because I think that's where a lot of my key learning is. And I have 2 grown, amazing young women as children who are in, one's out of university, one's in university. And my wife, we've been together 25 plus years. I don't know if there's enough superlatives I can share about who she is and what she is, other than she's a yogi and Buddhist, which is an amazing to have as a partner because she grounds me when I, start to lose it a little bit.
That's a great introduction. So thank you very much for that. And when I think one of the interests I've got, that the podcast is called Leadership Bites. So it's elements of when leaders are reflecting, what can be, or people that would like to be in a leadership role, what do they maybe need to think about? So for me, my experience of you vicariously from a distance and the observation of that is that, if you're heading up a role, let's just take like Nike, for example, there's the span of control you've got, there's the resources you've got and the expectations that come with the role. And then there's I guess, what it is that you stand for and the following you as a person. And I'm just wondering, in your growth, has that been, or maybe that understanding of, maybe at first, was it fulfilling the role, trying to get the task done, but actually I've learned, or what I'm hearing there is that the experience of me and what that means, what I'm offering to people. And have you ever had to balance that, or have you had moments where that's become more important to you, or realizing that?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is, I don't think financials are a predictor of success. I do really fundamentally believe they're a function of doing these other things well. And so a lot of those other things is creating an environment and a culture where there's empathy, where there's curiosity, where there's courage, where there's trust. And so for me, I've been fortunate. I've had great mentors. Like I had one mentor who said, any role you get in leadership, you should make yourself displaceable. And at first I was like, why would I do that? I want to, I'm trying to get to, maybe to this position. And she was like, no, just act as if your job is to make yourself displaceable, because then the behavior becomes, how do I actually nurture and cultivate those around the team in my role and my function to grow. And whether you're displaceable or not is not really the point. The point is that there's a behavior shift. So it's less about territorial. And my friend has this amazing belief that as you grow up in any company and up the ladder, that you become more and more of a sociopath, and you forget what it's like to be human in the world of business. And for me, it's no different than parenting a little bit. I want to be able to mentor, but I also want to be mentored. So I love creating environments where I'm constantly growing from those around me on my team. And I've been fortunate more often than not that that's the case. And so, and I've never really sought a job. I've never said, what title do I want? I generally am like, hey, this seems like a really interesting place to be, and then I'm generally land in a brand role or whatever. And I think the last thing for me is, I like environments where people can be their effortless selves, where they can just show up and not be a cog in the wheel, but be recognized. I'm an introvert by nature, and being an introvert, especially in a C-suite, it's hard as hell, because you sit there and you just take it all in. And, Krishnamurti's a famous philosopher here in Ojai, and he would always say, beware the man who knows. And I would write that in my notebook in meetings all the time, because I was like a reminder, like, stay curious, stay curious, stay curious. And so I'd like to think that I have and create an environment where people feel there's psychological safety, that they're trusted and they're empowered and they're pushed in a good, healthy way. But I just think at the end of the day, I'm really obsessed with what it means to be human in business. And I feel like that's just somehow like exited the world right now.
So one of the things that I know you're working on, I think you just launched, is Bonfire with Soul. .com, which I know one of my colleagues has already signed up for, and I'll make sure all the links are in the podcast notes. I'd love to hear about that, because that's what triggered me to call you. I saw on my LinkedIn feed that video, which again, I'll make sure there's a link to, and it grabbed me. I mean, the production quality was exceptional, which I'd expect now that I know what you're about, but the nature of it caught me. It wasn't the production quality, but it was the nature of it. It reached into me and made me go, oh my goodness. So it's obviously a passion, and I'd love to just hear what it is to you, and if I was going to pay attention to it, why I would, and what I get out of it.
Yeah, what's important is a little bit of the backstory. So growing up early in my youth in the Midwest, my parents were high school teachers in the late 60s and early 70s. And so I think there was this, teaching was like within my DNA, if you will. And then during the financial crisis, I had created my own company, but I taught at a couple graduate schools. And hands down, those were the most rewarding experience. Teaching for me was like, it was a love affair. I was mentoring and I was being mentored, but I was also infusing into not a playbook, but a philosophy around what I believed around business. And it was an outlier approach for sure. It rankled some feathers. I would say I think competition is an archaic thought, and yet in business school, first thing you're taught is, hey, let's go into the competition slide. And so in January, my wife and I always do this exercise of imagine a day, and it's like your 2 feet hit the ground and you're excited about the day. So what does the day look like? And it was visceral for me. I was like, I want to teach again. And a lot of it stemmed from the fact that as I'm in the bowels of business, I'm just watching what's happening. And then I read this study that said 85% of people are not engaged at work. 81% of people would find a new job if one came up. And less than a third of people felt there was a great culture. And I was like, man, my foe is business schools that teach this archaic way of thinking. And my foe is the acceptance of the status quo. Like, we spend so much time of our lives in the working world. And so the mere thought that someone would not feel engaged at work was unsettling for me. And so I left Lyme in March, and then I was like, you know what? Like, I have this itch to share this philosophy to the world. Like, what better time to do than now? And I initially thought I would want to teach at a graduate school, but the more I looked at the curriculum and the framework in which I had to operate, I was like, I want to break the rules that bind. I don't want to be a part of this. And so I've served up this course called Bonfires with Soul, and it's 12 principles that, but they're built around story and real life experiences. And so I want to be able to share with the world I don't think the world needs another business school course. I think it needs a new school of thought. And my vision and hope is that this philosophy isn't the end all be all, but that it sparks a revolution for people to start questioning business. Like, once again, I want introverts to thrive in business, and being an introvert in business is pretty damn hard. It's like whoever can talk the loudest or make the most statements. And I want inquiry to thrive. And, what does YouTube say? Wasn't the answers we had right, it was the questions we had wrong. I want people to live in a sense of inquiry all the time, and of being observance. And in this course, what's interesting is my mentors are not business. My mentors are nature. I've been a part of something called Biomimicry, which is like Ask Nature, which is an amazing thing founded by Janine Benyus in the 90s. I was on the board for actually 8 years. My mentors are horsemanship, think horse whisper. My mentors are Buckminster Fuller, yoga, Krishnamurti here in Ojai. And so I like to bring in poetry. I like to bring in a different influx of thinking, and it's not my nature to be an antagonist. So I want to be an inspired protagonist around just challenging convention and the status quo in a way that can open up a different conversation and hopefully different behavior.
So, is this aimed at, let me rephrase that question. So who would you like to pay attention to this?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's interesting. It's not a demographic. In fact, even everywhere I've gone, I think demographics are an interesting piece, but they're a subset. I think the main thing more for me everywhere I've gone is what's the mindset that we want to connect with. And I feel like we've termed it the optimistic rebel. And it's the next generation of business leaders who are like, man, I know there's a better way. I can sense it or see it or whatever, but I refuse to accept the status quo. I'm just not sure. And so that mindset, it's really for Bonfire with Soul as an introduction into this other path.
So anybody that in my space, the leadership space, that would be potential talent of people wanting to move into management leadership roles all the way through to a C-suite group of people, very much could be the audience for this.
Absolutely. I mean, I will say I haven't I think deep down, I'm not sure there'll be a lot of C-suite people, because what I've seen in the C-suite is there's not really a beginner's mind around much. And it's like you get to this place and then all curiosity, inquiry kind of evaporates. And so it's probably for the next generation of business leaders. And, I've seen registration already, some C-suite people, so I'm not knocking that. I just wish there was more curiosity around it. Yeah. So anyways, and it's also the other thing, the key thing is I've used this philosophy in public companies, private companies, small companies, big companies. I'm on the board of several nonprofits, and it's the same philosophy. And so what I share is that it has no bias. Like you don't have to be a big company, a small company, or a public or a private or a profit or nonprofit. It is, I believe, and I've borne witness to it over the last 30 plus years, that it's applicable and accessible really to anybody that is open to a new way of thinking.
And would I expect to find, I need to start asking better questions, not closed questions, but I suppose the question is, what do I find within the course? What is the learning that I can expect to receive that might reinforce the good, might calibrate where I'm close but could be better, or what might fundamentally bring me challenge?
The heartbeat of Bonfire with Soul is really about culture, brand, and leadership. And my hope and my intention is to invite a different way or a different lens of how we look at a lot of different things. So for example, the first principle is product is a mirror into your soul. And what I share is that if you don't have a great product, the rest of the 11 principles are somewhat muted. That said, I think it's less about always a physical product, or a digital product, and a product is every touch point. So Bonfire with Soul, and we've been maniacal about every touch point. So for example, we created a manifesto book, and then we're like, all right, well, what's the packaging? Oh, it's going to go on the post. And we're like, well, was that really what we want to do? And then the team at the Do Lectures, who I've partnered with, they're like, hey, we're going to put it in this box with kindling, and it's going to be a sticker, like, here's your fire starter kit. And so my point is that, like, on product, for example, it's not about creating a product team, it's about creating a product culture. And it's recognizing that every single touch point matters, and you're defined by everything you do well and everything you do not so well. And unfortunately, the latter has sometimes more impact on people than the former. And then I challenge the whole idea of competition. At Nike, we didn't talk about competition because we recognized that we weren't in the business of making sneakers and tees. We were in the business of bottling inspiration. And that was a completely different jet stream than how everyone else was playing. And so we were like, what the world needs now that we're most uniquely qualified to deliver is inspiration and innovation. So let's do that ad nauseum, but just evolve it. And so as an example, if you think about Nike, obviously it's created inspiration on the pitch or on the sports arenas in the fields, but then it's done it with the Girl Effect, which was an incredibly effective body of work from Nike, and it's become a UN resolution about the role of education for women. It did a lot of work on If You Let Me Play back in the late 90s about letting young girls, the role that sports plays in the lives of young women as they grow up. It was about Colin Kaepernick, taking a stance, and that was the level of inspiration. But that simple idea, I think to me, when you're obsessed with competition, it creates a culture of fear. Because you're looking at what others are doing constantly, and there becomes angst and anxiety, where when you play with an unbridled passion around this like open territory and mosaic for you, then it's fun. I mean, when I got to Lululemon, it was a tough time. And I remember people were like, oh, look at what these other brands are doing. I'm like, time out, just put that to the side. And we said, what business do we need to be in? And through the help of some amazing people, we got to this place of, hey, the world doesn't need to do yoga, it needs to be yoga. So how can we show that yoga shows up in, yoga is more than just on the mat. Asana is just one of the 8 limbs of yoga. There's 7 other amazing limbs that actually reinforce what it means to be human in this world, and shows up every day: compassion, empathy, whatever. So let's begin to adventure down that path. And then that was just like a rocket ship. It was like we just took off. And so in terms of the learning, I'm sharing what I believe are the fundamental things that are not about financials, but the thinking and the attitude and the behavior that will deliver those, but also, more importantly, deliver a real vibrant culture in a community, both inside and outside of your brand or your company.
So I'm really feeling a sense of humanity in play here, and a real kind of one of the things I often see in businesses is this phrase corporate social responsibility, and I've often said, can we just lose the word corporate, and just call it social responsibility? And there's something here which is you. There's something here which is maybe bigger than you, in the sense of where potentially something like this could go. But I imagine that there's this is about people's sense of relationship with themselves. This is about the permissions they give themselves and where they want to put their energy and their focus, and dealing with their fear, I guess, of, do I have the right as a human being? Well, I do, but am I given a space to be human? And there's I can sense then there's a lot of challenge in this. So is this program very in terms of the experience of it, is it modular led? Is it from other conversations? Because I imagine listening to a video or watching a module would trigger so much potential need for greater conversation. Where does that go, and how does the program, or if it does, deal with that? Because there's a trigger point, and then there's my need to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, humanist is at the heart of how I hold so many things. I mean, I've always questioned, and it's a question I'll never be able to fully answer, but it's like, what does it mean to be human? And when we were developing Bonfire with Soul, initially it was like, hey, we're going to do these Zoom calls. But going back to product is a mirror into your soul, I was worried about a couple of things. I was worried about technical glitches, but I also wanted to romance the storytelling through music and B-roll footage. And I wanted people to feel like what these things and have them come to life. The other piece was I wanted to complement each principle with another real life example from people I've known that can share their story, and you can see it. And it's we've edited these podcasts once again with music and B-roll. And so, for example, in the principle around live empathy, Kalila is this amazing EVP of HR at True Colors, who's pioneering a new way of looking at HR, all built around empathy. And so there's 12 hours of content recorded, but I also want to have that interaction. And so the course runs over 3 weeks. It opens up with a live global Zoom call where I just kind of say, hey, here's what to expect, and a quick intro. I might have my wife do some breathing exercise at the start just to get us grounded. And then in 1 week, you drop a recording of the principle, you get the podcast, but then we also have a weekly Q&A Zoom, and we offered up 3 times or 2 times so that it's time zone appropriate. And then there's a Slack channel, and it's been funny, like the Slack channel right now is already on fire because it's a community of people, I think, that are super, like, I give anybody credit right now who's registered for this course because they probably don't know me. They're not really sure exactly what I mean, they have a sense of what I'm going to offer, but they're not exactly sure. So they're insanely curious. We've also made it like money back guarantee if you don't like it. Like, I don't want anyone to feel like this was wasting my time. So, and I don't believe that's going to be true, but if it is, like, that's fine. I really just want people to walk away like, damn, that exceeded my expectations. And so I'm actually going to be pretty active on Slack. You know, I imagine there's going to be a lot of questions as well. And then we close with a reflections global Zoom, where we just, you know, I love to close with reflections in meetings. And it's just like, okay, where are we at? What do we see? What is this? What does this mean? And kind of what's next, if you will. And I will say the other thing is we're ahead of our projections and registrations, which is super encouraging. It ends tomorrow, I think at midnight. But I think what I'm most impressed with is it's global. I mean, it's Asia, it's the Pacific region, it's the UK, it's you know, Germany, France, Switzerland, US, Canada. I love the global nature of it all, and even there's no set profile of people that have registered. It's people from all walks of life doing all sorts of different things.
And do you expect to roll this as a continual program if the need is there?
We do. I think this, you know, it's been a pretty good investment of time, but also financial. You know, like I invested in recordings, I invested in the podcast. And so I think for us, it was like, hey, we have all these things now packaged together. Why wouldn't we just continue to introduce this so that, you know, as many people as possible can experience it? We've also, by the way, in this first one, we've done 2 price points. We've done the suggested price point, and then we've also recognized that it's a really tough time in the world right now. And so we offered another price point, and we let people decide which one, a lower price point. They can decide which one they want to select.
Okay.
But yeah, one of the principles is the beauty of not knowing. We created this because we felt it was right for this moment, and where it goes in the future, I really don't know. And I'm not sure we're trying to dynamically steer it anyway. We'll know a lot after this first course.
Yeah.
You know, truth.
Well, I'm going to shout out to a lady called Deandra, who I know will listen to this and she'll go, oh, God, blimey, I can't believe you just said my name. But I have, because I showed her the clip and she went, wow. And she said, I'm signing up before the video had finished. So that's indicative of the impact that I think it could have. So I'm going to sort of shift us away from that just for a moment. But I was so caught by it that I wanted to give it good airtime. And I guess I can imagine people that intellectually, emotionally buy into what it is that you represent, but also what it is that you're offering within a program such as this. And I wonder if you ever have people that intellectually buy into this thinking, but have a fear. They fear what they might see as the lack of permission or license or space to be themselves in organizations that are bewitched by their agenda of the financials. And, you know, that's the kind of talk that doesn't really fly here. And I wonder how that, you know, I don't know if it's advice or the conversation that you might have with people that go, Duke, I get it, and I'd love to do so, but have you seen where I work, or have you met my boss? And I just wonder how that sits, and maybe the conversation that you have around that sometimes, because I imagine it must come up.
Well, I have deep sense of empathy because that's been my life, truthfully. So I've had this philosophy or these thoughts around things. I think more often than not, the most challenging part of where I've been in the different adventures is internally, not externally. It's getting people to see, feel, and trust like that there's this way. And, you know, like when I got to 7th generation, you know, I think people at first were like, who is this dude? Like, what the hell is he talking about? Or even at Lululemon, I remember when we were doing this campaign called This Is Yoga, which was to really share with the world why this brand mattered in a different way. My own peers, and maybe rightfully so, were like, I don't get it. Like, what's the return? What's the revenue going to be? And I would tell them, like, I don't know what the revenue is going to be, And so I share that because it takes courage. Like, I don't want to settle, because I feel like you can do most revolutions start from the bottom up. And I feel like if enough people start voicing their needs in a different way, or their wants and desires that beyond just the acceptance of things, I think that's the only way we'll go about creating change, truthfully. And it's not easy. And I'm just, there's been days where I have been at companies where I feel like I'm a salmon. I swam upstream, I fought, I spawned, and then I just died. And then it's like, okay, like on to another adventure. But I go back to, I don't think anyone wants to just exist in work. I think they want to feel alive. And I would feel like that's worth fighting for. Even if it meant, truthfully, having tough conversations with bosses or whatever, because the pain of accepting the status quo, to me, is far greater than any pain that could come from that conversation.
So what is the revolution? What's the end? What's the end game?
I shouldn't say I think. My belief is that the revolution is that we recognize in business the role of what it means to be human. When we create a culture of empowerment and trust, when we live in a culture of empathy, in yoga, namaste, the light of me sees the light of you. When we take the time to understand people.
I bow to the divine in you.
Yeah, so for example, when I do one-on-one meetings at Lululemon, they weren't about business primarily. They were like, what's going on with you and what's important? Like, where are you? And we would have just really robust conversations. And so the revolution is recognizing financials are not the predictor of success, but if you can do these other things while create a culture of empathy, create a culture of courage, create a culture of trust, challenge how we look at the current mechanical rote business models, then you have this amazing capacity to do incredible things. It's no different. Think of if you're in a theater group or on a sports team. I mean, I'm a typical American. I'm terrible at Premier League football, so my apologies. But when I listen to, is it Klopp?
I know no more about football than you do. So I'm aware there's a round ball involved, and that's where I top out.
Yeah, I just think leaders, I would think vulnerability, how often do we bring vulnerability into the workplace? Like in the workplace, you all of a sudden have to show up with this sense of armor in this mask. And then, work's over, and then I can take it all off. And I'm like, screw that. I want people to show up as their effortless selves every day. I want to invite a diversity of thought and race and gender and ethnicity, so that there's this amazing rich soil of microbes that can just challenge, things. And yet business has become monoculture, monocrop thinking. We have this belief, that there's this hierarchy of, as you get older or up the ladder, you're the wise one. And the reality is some of the best thinking is sprinkled throughout any company culture in the most amazing places. And so I would love for company to be human again. And that goes back to me, trust and empathy and courage.
I love it. I think it's very powerful. I think some things come along for the right time at the right time. And this definitely is one of those things that, without having experienced it, which I'm going to try and do, it really resonates. Is there anything else that you're involved in that is something that you want to talk about? Or actually, if I sort of say, I know this is sort of very real right now, but where are you headed? What do you have a sense of, I may not have every stepping stone sorted, but I think over the next X amount of years where I'm trying to get to is?
Yeah, perhaps I'm an outlier in this thinking, but I don't work from like this big purpose or set of goals. I work on what I'm curious about. And then I just invite and try to stay attuned to opportunity from there. And so for me right now, I'm really enjoying this Bonfire with Soul endeavor. I have no idea where it will go or won't go, truthfully. So that's that's my own invitation into the unknown. But I love the unknown, which, in human culture, we loathe uncertainty. And I'm actually the opposite. I'm like, man, this is like, there's, Krishnamurti, the philosopher, says, to know is to be in prison, and to not know is to be free. And so I'm just curious. And what I'm curious right now is the role of humanists in business. I'm also super curious about education. And how, like, I'm on the board of this amazing K through 12 school here in Ojai, which is incredibly unique. My daughters went there, and I feel like they get it in terms of how the role of education is to nurture and cultivate the whole child and the whole student, not just knowledge based. There's this other level of learning that needs to happen. And so we'll see. I haven't been eager to jump back in the business world, because I feel like where I need to be right now is this inspired protagonist trying to, spark a different level of thought. And I don't know where it will go, but I embrace that.
I think if you do a book, I think that's your title, The Inspired Protagonist.
Yeah,
Could be it.
It's funny. I don't think anything gets solved through anger or hate or loathing. I think it just exasperates a divide. And so my whole thing is, I learned a lot of this even at Nike. It wasn't when Nike was born, fitness was like, running was like, geez, and crow, who wants to run? But if you can inspire, you don't say, hey, get your ass out there and start running. You inspire people to run. That's different. Like, we used to have this thing at Nike, is if you saw anyone running on the side of the road, regardless of how slow, fast, whatever body shape, you always just give them a thumbs up. You just like,
yeah,
well
I get
done.
it. Yeah, I get what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And so for me, I have a foe, which once again is business schools and the acceptance of the status quo, but I want the body of work to be inspiring. And so as an inspired protagonist, not an antagonist, that's important to me.
Well, listen, I'm hugely alert to your time, and I'm under the right circumstances, I could keep going on to the point where you go, Guy, I really do need to go now. So I'm going to be really alert to that. And I'm just going to thank you for your time. It's given a bit of an insight into you. It'll introduce you to some people that, may not be alert to your work. And I'm definitely going to, make sure it gets as far as I can kind of put it out there. And with your permission, I'll reach out, and maybe there's a phase 2 on this, where you're going and what's happened. And, that could be really interesting for people as well. So on that note, I'm going to say thank you so much, and just ask you just to hang on for a minute when I press stop on the record button, just to make sure nothing goes wrong. But Duke, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Indeed. That's it. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness, and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book, Living Brave Leadership, on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.